Hi. This video isn't about Dead by Daylight. This video isn't about video games at all. This video isn't about memes. This video is not about any of the content you've come to expect me to puke out. This video is about science and education and some other things maybe. I'm not too sure on that one. This video is a science project for my 6th period physics class. The project in question is part of our give me a second. Thermodynamics unit, and covers the essential subject of heat transfer. See, I was asked a question yesterday. Hey Mither, how does an oven work versus a microwave oven, and which is better for cooking food? And today, I'm going to use the power of science and education to give a thorough analysis of the two heating mechanisms, how they transfer heat, and what the different methods of heat transfer do to your food. But I'm not just going to sit here and explain it all boring like, no, I'm going to explain it by drawing parallels between it and something that you can watch.
Watch with your eyes.
Remember when I said this video wasn't about Dead by Daylight? Well, that's not entirely true, because I'm going to use Dead by Daylight to help explain the different heat mechanisms to you. For those of you who don't know what Dead by Daylight is, it's an asymmetrical multiplayer horror game. 4 survivors go against 1 killer to try and not get sacrificed and escape the trial, but that's not important. What is important is this hunk of mamma jamma right here. This, ladies and gents, is the Oni, and he's going to show us how the heat transfer of ovens works. See, Oni has a special superpower called Yamaoka's Wrath. Basically, when he injures survivors, they drop blood orbs. Oni absorbs blood orbs, and that makes him more powerful. When he's got enough power, he can do this, and also this. But why is this important? How does this open our eyes on oven mechanics using the power of and... Well, let me explain. Ovens use a special method of heat transfer called conduction. In case you weren't paying attention in class the other day, which I'm guessing is most of you, conduction is what happens when objects of different temperatures come into contact with each other. The thermal energy from the hotter object flows into the colder object, making it hotter. That's how ovens work. When you put cold food in an oven and turn it on, the burners inside heat up the surrounding air. Since that air has more thermal energy than the food, heat is transferred from the air into the food, thus cooking your dish. Oni's power works just like that. In this case, Oni is the cold object, the survivor is the heat source, and the blood orb is the thermal energy. The survivor has a higher thermal energy than the Oni does, and when the Oni comes into contact with their thermal energy, he absorbs it and heats up. When he gets hot enough, the food is done. So that's how an oven works. It's honestly pretty simple. But before we move on to microwaves and their enigmatic way of being, let's go on a mild tangent equating to conduction transfer. Heat, equilibrium. Notice that when the Oni is at full power, he can no longer absorb the blood orbs. That is because he and the blood orbs are at thermal equilibrium. Heat energy will always flow from a hotter object to the colder one, but when the Oni's power gauge is full, he and the blood orbs are the same temperature. Neither one is colder than the other, and thus the heat energy has nowhere to go. Thus, it doesn't go anywhere until the Oni cools off and is once more colder than the blood orbs, at which point he can absorb them again until he hits thermal equilibrium again. Just like your food. If the roast in the oven reaches the same temperature as the air in the oven, it will stop heating up. Though, I imagine if the roast in your oven is 425 degrees Fahrenheit, your house is probably on fire? But enough about that. We get it. Ovens, conduction. Cold stuff takes heat from hot stuff. But how do microwaves heat up food? It's not hot inside of a microwave, so obviously it can't take energy from the air inside. The answer to that, ladies and gentlemen, is radiation heat transfer. Radiation heat transfer occurs when an object either comes into contact with or generates thermal radiation. In the case of the microwave, the food is generating radiation that heats it up. Now I know what you're thinking. Microwaves make my food radioactive? Now hold on, Cupcake. No, it doesn't make your food radioactive because technically it already is radioactive. When most people say radioactive, they usually mean it emits like nuclear waste or ionizing radiation or something like that, something deadly. But everything gives off some form of radiation. Radioactive doesn't necessarily mean it's giving off nuclear waste. All objects that are above absolute zero give off thermal radiation, which takes the form of infrared waves, which are too weak to hurt us. So A, calm down, and B, yes, Imagine Dragons, scientifically speaking, is in fact radioactive. I'm going to commit honorable seppuku when I'm done with this presentation. Anyway, how do they make your food heat itself up? Well, it's in the name. Microwave. Microwaves blast your food with a weak form of electromagnetic energy known as microwave radiation. This radiation causes the particles inside of your food to start rotating powerfully. This increase in movement generates kinetic energy, which then causes the food to heat up. And once more, as a visualizer, let's turn to Dead by Daylight. This magical specimen you see in front of you is the Plague. I'll give you 5 minutes to make your coronavirus jokes and then we gotta move on, okay? 5, 4, 1. Okay, let's go. As you could guess by her name, the Plague's power is, well, giving people the plague. Let's see how it works. So the plague spreads the infection by puking on a survivor. Are you really surprised? Once the survivor is infected, the plague can either increase their sickness drastically by puking on them more, or the survivor is forced to passively get sicker the more they perform certain actions, like running and doing their objective. When the survivor reaches maximum sickness, that's when the plague, the sickness, not the killer, physically injures them and they start spreading the infection to other survivors. Much like the Oni functions a lot like conduction heat, the plague can easily be likened to radiation heat, only this time, the plague is the source of heat, not the survivor. So the plague is a microwave and the survivor is a cold pizza. Perfectly normal thing to put in the microwave. When the plague vomits on a survivor, she is shooting microwave radiation at them. Once the radiation is inside them, it excites the particles inside the pizza and they start to heat up. The more a survivor moves, the faster the sickness spreads throughout their system. Similarly, the faster the particles in the pizza start to rotate, the more the pizza will heat up. It gets hotter and hotter until finally, it reaches the radiation equivalent of thermal equilibrium. When the survivor is fully sick, that's the point at which they start spreading the infection to other survivors. This is also, in a way, how radiation-based heat transfer works. Objects absorb radiation until they are at the same temperature as their surroundings. Then, when you take that hot object to a colder area, it will start projecting its thermal radiation into the world around it, much like how fully infected survivors spread the sickness to healthy survivors. The healthy ones are colder than they are, so to speak, and thus absorb their thermal radiation. So there you have it. Ovens use conduction heat transfer while microwaves use radiation heat transfer. But which one is better? Well, it depends. Both methods of heat have their own advantages and disadvantages. The biggest advantage microwaving has over oven cooking is something I'm sure we all know at this point. Speed. Microwave ovens cook food way faster than ovens do. If you take a look back at Oni, you'll notice that when he absorbs all the blood orbs, he gets his power very fast, but 1 or 2 blood orbs by themselves don't really give him that much of his power. That's how ovens work. Oni is a thick boy, and blood orbs are a small source of heat for him. It takes time for the entirety of the food to absorb all the heat it needs to be cooked all the way through. Microwaves, on the other hand, much like the plague's infection, cause the food to do the work on its own. It spreads throughout the food system, heating it up through its own kinetic energy. The food doesn't absorb the heat, the food is the heat. But the speedy method of cooking food comes at a price. See, the thing with microwaves is that they don't just cause any old particle to start rotating. No, radiation heat transfer works best on polar molecules. If you don't remember anything from chemistry class last year, polar molecules are particles where one side is heavier than the other, and there is one very, very polar molecule found in nearly every source of food. Water. Here's a picture of a water molecule. On the right side are 2 hydrogen atoms, and on the left is the 1 oxygen atom. Even though molecules are very light by our standards, this oxygen atom is much, much heavier than the 2 hydrogen atoms, making water quite the polar molecule. Microwaves are designed to heat up the water in your food since those particles are the ones that best respond to radiation heat transfer. The problem arises in the fact that water has a pretty low boiling point. The temperature at which liquid water changes to gas is not that high, so when you subject water to all this radiation and it heats up super hot, it's entirely likely that it will evaporate, and when the water evaporates, the food your microwave does what this sick survivor does. It expels its fluids. When the water in your food evaporates, it escapes your food and dries it out. This is one of the main disadvantages of microwave cooking compared to conduction cooking. Dry foods. Don't believe me? Well, here, let me prove it. Against my better judgment, I put some cheese in a bowl and nuked it for a full minute. When I took it out, the cheese was not only dry and brittle, but you could physically see the bubbles of the water inside of it boiling off. The water from the cheese had been almost entirely evaporated. Case closed. This evaporation also carries a second issue. See, not only does it dry out your food, but, well, think about it. The water in the food is heated up, but then the water evaporates. The kinetic energy doesn't magically transfer from the water to the rest of the food, no. It stays with the water as it evaporates. This means that when the water leaves the food, so does the heat. Microwave foods take less time to heat up, sure, but in exchange, it takes a lot less time to cool down as well. The part of the food that holds the heat is inclined to leave, and when it does, it's gone. It's not in the food anymore, it's in the air, and you can't have it. Conduction heat doesn't have this problem because it doesn't heat up the water, it heats up all of the food. All of the particles in the food are able to absorb the heat energy of hot air, not just the water. This means that even if the food does dry out, it will stay nice and hot. But the thing is, it probably won't dry out for one reason. specific heat. Water has a very high specific heat of 4,186 joules per kilogram degrees Celsius. This means that it takes 4,186 joules of heat energy to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. Compare that to, say, beef, which has a specific heat of about 1,470 joules per kilogram degrees Celsius, and it takes a lot less heat to raise the temperature of beef than it does water. By the time the roast in the oven is a sufficient temperature, all the heat energy hasn't quite spread to the water inside the meat yet because of its higher specific heat, so it's not quite hot enough to start evaporating. So despite its temperature, your roast is still full of juice and full of flavor. So to answer the question, which is better for cooking, a microwave or an oven? They both have their purposes. Oven cooking is more culinary, but microwaving is more convenient and easier. If you just want to fire up a quick breakfast before school, the microwave is your best bet. If you have some time though and are willing to put in the effort to make something nice and tasty, the oven is the way to go. And hey, now you know why Gordon Ramsay gets so upset when people use the microwave.
It's rule.